The question was this area might become a spy base if it's taken over and become a super embassy for the Chinese government. The security services who objected to this being the embassy for the Chinese government.
They walk outside from the Manchester Chinese consulate. They came out with riot gear and they dragged our protester into the consulate.
The question really is, why does the Chinese embassy has such an enormous staff? But that doesn't change the reality that the United Kingdom must engage with China, whether we agree with it or not.
China's plan to build the largest embassy in the UK, opposite the Tower of London, have been refused by Tower Hamlets Council, have been opposed by the Met Police, and identified as a security risk in a 2019 report by several UK security agencies. Now, though, Angela Rayner is reconsidering the plans after China resubmitted them under the Labour government. So why is Beijing so set on an upgrade from their current London embassy?
Well, what the Chinese government would like to do is to, if you like, modernize the old Royal Mint estate and use it as the new embassy compound. And I think they would probably like to build up on the land so that they can accommodate some of their staff on site as well. I mean, what we have to bear in mind is that it is a very large piece of real estate in the Tower Hamlet. But the Chinese embassy is also absolutely enormous in terms of its establishment.
And how big of an upgrade is this from their current embassy that they have in the UK?
Well, their current embassy is off Portland Place. It's really not a very large site for the size of the Chinese diplomatic representation in this country. I mean, if you really want to ask the question really is, why does the Chinese embassy has such an enormous staff in the UK? But if you accept that they should have that large number of people working for the embassy, then it is not unreasonable on their part to ask for a much more spacious site to accommodate their staff.
And there are some security concerns that have been raised surrounding the embassy. What are those, and why have those come to light?
Well, I think truly legitimate security concern will be the disruptions to the local people in the event of having significant protest against the Chinese government policy on this or that matters. So people living in the area where a new Chinese embassy is to be located will have a reasonable grounds to say that, well, we don't really want to have to deal with that kind of problems. The fact that you already have an embassy and people around there are accustomed to it is not a reason why we should accept that it will become our problems.
Since the plans were first put forward in 2018, the former Royal Mint buildings have been the site of several protests, culminating in this demonstration, attended by local residents, human rights groups and British MPs.
We do not want this to become a mega embassy of the Chinese Communist Party.
Now Angela Rayner has used the power to take it in case to review it. I think we have a very simple answer to Angela Rayner, and that is no!
The plans for this building here for the embassy have been termed a spy base by some. Do you agree with that sentiment?
Well, that's pretty much what the security services think, because they oppose it. There are cables going past here which have a huge amount of important traffic going through them. They don't want this here for that reason. So what you're getting with the government now is a kind of kowtow to the Chinese government, because they've been told the Chinese want this, the Chinese government want it. They're going all wobbly and they're going to give it to them. You heard Keir Starmer down in Brazil say first, the moment he met President Xi, we're going to call your embassy plan in. That's tantamount to saying, we will give you what you want. Everybody was opposed to this. Rayner calls it in. We know the security service said no, they're the wrong place for it. And we all know these arterial roads go south of the river, off to Canary Wharf, into the city. And the police originally put in a report to say they were opposed to it as well. Then they somehow changed that and said, oh, we can manage, it'll be all right with protests. What this has proved today is, I'm sorry, that police report that said you could deal with protests, you've got the main road to Canary Wharf now shut, you've got the main road to the city shut, and the rest over towards the West End in chaos. This is a demonstration, and it's the wrong place for an embassy because there is no place for this demonstration. They should go somewhere else, preferably south of the river. The Americans did that for those reasons, so should they.
And are you confident that the plan to set up an embassy here will be blocked again?
I don't know. Angela Rayner now has control, but if she sees the pictures of this, she'll see what happens. This is not a place you can hold a protest.
What do you make of Labour's plans to reverse the initial rejection? What do you think that says about their relations with China?
Weak. It shows how weak they are and how China wants, China gets. It's not a policy for a democracy that believes in human rights and the rule of law. China's a threat. We know it's a threat. The security service know it's a threat. So suddenly calling it okay doesn't make it less than a threat. And they are a threat. And the chaos around here today and the views of many who have fled from the China brutality in Hong Kong and across China, the Uyghurs as well, suffering genocide, they will tell you the message as to why it shouldn't be here as well.
I'm from Northwest, so around us we have got the Manchester Chinese consulate, and then they've got a very terrible history of sending mobs inside the consulate, coming out to beat up peaceful protesters.
Do you think that's something that could happen here?
I think so, yeah, that will. Because obviously last time they came out from the Manchester Chinese consulate and beat up the protesters, and then the staff in there, obviously there are a couple of mobs beat up our people. However, they didn't take accountable, to be honest with you. And then the government just responded in a very quiet way. They didn't arrest anyone in the consulate. And also the head of consulate, he flew back to China after that. So I believe that if something happened in here, for instance, if they send the mobs again within the embassy and beat up protesters, I believe that the government just let them go away, unfortunately.
I've been sanctioned, I've been threatened, but I'm able to look after myself. What I think about is those Hong Kongers, those Chinese citizens who have been threatened personally and directly here in London. And there are some even suggestions that it may have gone further. Now, what we need to do is to make sure that we are defending those people. And that means not allowing the type of incidents that we saw in Manchester at the Consulate General or in Glasgow and Croydon, where those police stations were set up, or indeed at other places where we've seen Chinese agents or those employed by the Chinese state to take action against people here. We've got to say no. And that's why allowing a major embassy like this sends entirely the wrong signal and allows China to believe that they can carry on as normal. They can't, and they mustn't.
MI5 have already warned the Labour government of the risk of national security risk. It's already been warned that last year that there's a lot of clandestine CCP agency all over the country. So imagine if the mega embassy is allowed to go ahead, Lord knows what will happen to the security of this country.
I've lived there for 26 years when it was the Crown Estate land, and now I live on the land that belongs to the People's Republic of China.
And what are you worried about with having such a large embassy here?
We live on the freehold of our land is the Chinese and the Chinese Republic of China. You look at things like the Manchester where they dragged somebody in. My flat is 8.5 metres from the wall, and the fence, they only consider a fence is all they need to divide us. You know, they're going to have cameras watching us all the time, so our privacy is going to be out the window. And anything they think is not going to be, is going to be unreasonable, they can come in and sort it out.
If they move here, they can easily take the people inside and beat them if we are against the CCP. It means that around this area is not safe anymore. It's being surveillanced.
I've been part of the protest against the super embassy for several years, back when we blocked it the first time. We always knew that this would be the real test. We know that at council level, at the Met Police, The residents, the communities, they all oppose it. The real test was always going to be when the government said that they called it in. So we're hoping that this huge turnout today is the thing that sways them and makes it very clear that it's not wanted here, not by anybody outside the CCP.
Look at it, the road's closed, the police are struggling, and this is 1,000 people, and they forecast they could do 4,000, no problems at all. It's nonsense.
It'd be awful for the locals, yes, and for the tourists. I think it's a disaster. It's quite dangerous.
And what would you rather the government do about this?
To refuse?
I'm from this. My society is Hong Kong guy in this. I'm zero. If make a super embassy here, there will be more spies in UK. Spies is very trouble. Yes.
What's your view on this embassy? Why shouldn't it be here?
I don't think anything of China should be here, but with their record of oppression and surveillance, it really isn't a good thing to have it here at all.
So what do you think about the government's original decision to reject the planning, and then now they've said they're going to review it? What do you make of that?
Well, from a human rights lawyer, I think it's pretty damn grim. To have Keir Starmer kowtowing is really not good. It's shameful. I feel ashamed.
While figures from across Parliament believe the UK should remain wary of China, there are signs that the government is set now on a more reciprocal relationship with Beijing.
It would look like that the Labour government is more willing to push through the procedures in order to allow the Chinese government to have their embassy in the Tower Hamlet. Now, we should not forget that the British embassy in Beijing itself is too small for the purposes that the UK has in Beijing. And the British government has asked to expand the UK embassy in Beijing, and it has not been very well received in Beijing either. So there is an element of quid pro quo there. If we do not accept a new Chinese embassy in London, then the Chinese government will almost certainly not accept modifications to the British embassy in Beijing. Then you have a question of which one is more important to us. Simply not allowing the Chinese to have an embassy, which is not, to be quite honest, not a very reasonable position to take, because when we are dealing with a major world power, whether we agree with their policies and their values or not, we will have to engage with them, and that means that we have to facilitate the existence and where necessary, physical expansion of the infrastructure to support that diplomatic mission. And that is the reason why we wanted the UK embassy in Beijing to be expanded itself as a completely legitimate request. In the case of China, of course, it is entirely up to the Chinese government to say whether the UK embassies can or cannot be enlarged. But in the case of the United Kingdom, a lot of it usually comes down to the local authorities. What is different between the Tory government and the current Labour government is the willingness of the Labour government to say that the central government will take over this responsibility and make a decision to allow it to happen, whereas the Tory government simply accepted that the Tower Hamlets authorities should have the final say.
And does this reflect anything wider about the difference in the current Labour UK government's relations with China and the former Conservative government? I mean, does it reflect just a wider sense of warmer feeling between the two governments?
I think what it reflects is the Labour government much more focused on the economy, and therefore when it is working out its China policy, give more weight to what the Treasury has to say on the matter than previously when the Tory government was separating them a bit more. But when we say previously under the Tory government, we are talking about several different Tory governments. It was under the Cameron-Osborne era when Cameron handed over China policy from the Foreign Office to the Treasury, and it was George Osborne as Chancellor of the Exchequer who came up with the idea of a golden era in UK-China relations. Now, that didn't get us very far. I think we have to bear in mind that there are structural issues in the relationship between the UK and China. When the current Chancellor went to China, she came back with a deal of headline figure of, was it 600 million pounds of trade deal over a period of 5 years. Now, for a country with the UK's trading capacity, 600 million over 5 years is peanut. It's almost insulting figure, particularly since this kind of headline figures usually includes projects that are already in the pipeline and projects that are promised but never really come to fruition. So there is a basic structural issue in terms of how much economic complementarity we are going to be able to forge. But that doesn't change the reality that the United Kingdom must engage with China, whether we agree with it or not.